Grace was 59 when she finally realized that surviving wasn't the same as truly living. For years, she had followed the path everyone expected of her. She had been a devoted wife, a loving mother, and eventually a proud grandmother. Her days revolved around responsibilities, traditions, and caring for everyone else. Somewhere along the way, without even noticing, she had tucked away pieces of herself until they were almost impossible to find. Standing at the foot of the narrow attic staircase one quiet afternoon, she felt an unfamiliar pull urging her upward. It wasn't simply curiosity. It felt more like an invitation from the past, one she had ignored for far too long. More than 10 years had passed since William's death. After 35 years of marriage, losing him had changed the rhythm of her entire world. He had slipped away peacefully during the night, leaving behind a lifetime of memories and a silence that settled into every room of the house. In the months that followed, Grace handled everything the way people expected her to. She organized the funeral, comforted family members, donated his clothes, and kept herself busy with chores that distracted her from the ache in her heart. Friends often complimented her strength, unaware that every smile required tremendous effort. There was only one place she never managed to face: the attic. That small room held everything she couldn't bear to sort through. Old photographs, keepsakes from vacations, forgotten gifts, handwritten notes, decorations from anniversaries, and countless reminders of the life she and William had built together. Closing the attic door had become easier than opening it. But something was different that afternoon. A gentle spring breeze drifted through an open window carrying the fragrance of blooming lilacs. The sunlight seemed softer somehow, warming the hallway in a way that made the house feel less lonely. Grace rested her hand on the wooden railing and decided that perhaps it was finally time. Slowly, she climbed each step. Her knees protested with every movement, and the old staircase creaked beneath her weight as though announcing her return after years of absence. When she reached the top, she paused. Dust floated lazily through thin beams of sunlight that filtered in from the tiny attic window. The air carried the scent of aged cardboard, cedar chests, faded fabric, and forgotten years. Everything looked exactly as she had left it, frozen in time. She stood there quietly for several moments, letting the memories settle around her before reaching for the nearest storage box. Inside rested an old photo album. Its once bright cover had faded with age, and the corners were bent from years of handling. She gently brushed away a layer of dust before opening it with careful hands. The first photograph caught her completely off guard. A young woman laughed freely beneath a cloudless sky while standing barefoot on a sandy beach. She wore a bright yellow swimsuit, oversized sunglasses, and a carefree smile that seemed impossible to fake. Sunlight highlighted her windblown hair, and confidence radiated from every inch of her posture. Grace blinked. For a brief moment, she struggled to recognize the woman staring back at her. Then she realized it was her. She couldn't remember what had caused that joyful laugh or who had been standing behind the camera. Those details had faded with time. Yet the happiness captured in that single photograph felt unmistakably real. She traced the image with the tip of her finger. "I forgot about you," she whispered softly. Not the photograph. The woman she had once been. There had been a time when she traveled without planning every detail, danced until sunrise, accepted spontaneous invitations, and believed the future held endless possibilities. Marriage, raising children, paying bills, and countless everyday responsibilities hadn't erased that version of her overnight. Life had simply buried her beneath years of obligations. Grace continued turning the pages. There were road trips with friends, birthday celebrations, family picnics, camping adventures, holidays filled with laughter, and countless moments that reminded her life had once been wonderfully unpredictable. She smiled through tears she hadn't expected. The sound of footsteps climbing the stairs interrupted her thoughts. "Grace." She looked toward the doorway. Standing there was Ethan, her step-grandson. She hadn't seen him in nearly 3 years. Work had taken him across the country, and although they occasionally exchanged holiday messages, life had kept them apart. Seeing him now brought an unexpected wave of happiness. He looked older than she remembered. His youthful awkwardness had been replaced by quiet confidence. His shoulders were broader, his expression calmer, and he carried himself with an ease that spoke of experience. A cup of coffee rested in one hand while a paper bag hung from the other. "I noticed your car outside," he said with an easy smile. "I thought I'd surprise you." "Ethan," Grace laughed, genuinely delighted. "You nearly scared me." "Sorry," he replied with a grin. "I wasn't expecting to find you up here." He stepped into the attic, glancing around with curiosity before noticing the album resting in her lap. "Going through old memories?" Grace nodded. "I finally worked up the courage." He sat beside her, careful not to disturb the scattered boxes. "What are you looking at?" Without saying a word, she turned the album toward him. His eyebrows lifted immediately. "Wait, that's you." Grace chuckled. "Believe it or not." He looked back and forth between the photograph and the woman sitting beside him. "I never would have guessed," he admitted. "You looked like someone who was always ready for the next adventure." She laughed warmly. "I suppose I was." For the next several hours, they explored the attic together. One box revealed old postcards collected from family vacations. Another contained theater tickets, concert programs, faded birthday cards, and newspaper clippings. Every discovery unlocked another story. Grace spoke about road trips that had gone hilariously wrong, surprise parties thrown by old friends, embarrassing fashion choices, and moments she hadn't thought about in decades. Ethan listened with genuine interest. He wasn't simply being polite. He asked thoughtful questions, laughed at the funny memories, and seemed fascinated by discovering a side of Grace he had never known. "I've always thought of you as the person who baked cookies at every family gathering," he admitted. Grace smiled. "I've lived a few different lives before becoming that grandmother." "I'm starting to realize that." As they continued searching through old boxes, Grace found a shimmering emerald green dress carefully folded inside a garment bag. She held it up. "I remember wearing this to one of my closest friends' weddings." "It still looks beautiful," Ethan said. Grace laughed. "I'm sure it belongs in a museum by now." "You should try it on," he suggested. She shook her head immediately. "I doubt it would even fit." "You'll never know unless you check." His encouragement carried no pressure, only playful optimism. Grace hesitated before finally giving in. "I'll be right back." She stepped into the hallway, closed the attic door behind her, and carefully slipped into the dress. To her complete surprise, the zipper slid into place. Not perfectly, but comfortably enough. She stared into the old hallway mirror. The woman looking back wasn't 25 anymore. Fine lines framed her smile. Silver streaks shimmered through her hair. Years had changed her appearance. Yet something about wearing that dress reminded her she hadn't disappeared. She had simply grown older. Returning to the attic, she felt unexpectedly nervous. Ethan looked up from another storage box. His face brightened instantly. "It suits you," he said sincerely. Grace smiled, smoothing the fabric. "You really think so?" "I do." There was nothing complicated about his response. It wasn't about youth. It wasn't about appearances. It was admiration for someone discovering confidence she had forgotten she possessed. For the first time in years, Grace looked at herself with kindness instead of criticism. As evening settled outside, golden sunlight stretched across the attic floor, surrounding them with a peaceful glow. Boxes remained scattered everywhere, but somehow the room no longer felt heavy. It felt alive again. They shared stories until the light slowly faded. Before leaving, Ethan helped carry several boxes downstairs. At the front door, he paused. "I'm really glad I stopped by today." Grace smiled. "So am I." "You know," he continued, "I learned something." "Oh, I've known you my whole life, but today I met parts of you I'd never seen before." Grace felt tears gathering once again. Not from sadness, from gratitude. For years she had believed the most interesting chapters of her life were behind her. That afternoon reminded her something important. The past wasn't meant to trap her. It existed to remind her of the strength, courage, and joy she had carried all along. As Ethan drove away and the evening sky deepened into shades of blue, Grace stood quietly on the front porch. The attic door was still open upstairs. Instead of seeing it as a room filled with painful memories, she now saw it differently. It had become a doorway, not back into yesterday, but forward into a future where she finally remembered who she had always been. Little by little, I felt myself coming back to life. The attic became more than a forgotten room tucked beneath the roof. It became a place where memories could finally breathe. After that first afternoon, Ethan began stopping by regularly. At first, he insisted he was simply helping me sort through decades of boxes that had been left untouched. Before long, our visits became a quiet tradition. Every few days, he'd arrive carrying 2 cups of coffee and greet me with the same easy smile. "Ready for another treasure hunt?" he'd ask. I always laughed, even on days when I hadn't expected to. Together, we worked through boxes one at a time. Some held faded photographs, others contained handwritten letters, old recipes, postcards from family vacations, and children's drawings that had somehow survived decades in storage. Each discovery uncovered another forgotten piece of my life. For years, I had remembered myself only as a widow. Inside that attic, I began remembering the woman who had existed long before grief found her. One afternoon, we uncovered an old record player wrapped carefully inside a blanket. Miraculously, it still worked. Alongside it sat a stack of vinyl records from another era. We spent the afternoon listening to music that filled the attic with songs I hadn't heard in decades. The melodies carried me back to college dances, neighborhood parties, family celebrations, and evenings when William and I were just beginning our life together. When one of my favorite songs began to play, Ethan grinned. "You can't just sit there. I'm far too old for dancing." I don't believe that for a second. He held out a hand with exaggerated formality. Laughing, I accepted. For a few minutes, we danced clumsily around dusty boxes, nearly tripping over old furniture more than once. Neither of us cared. We laughed until tears filled our eyes. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't impressive. It was simply joyful. That joy stayed with me long after the music stopped. A few days later, I opened a container labeled Clothes 1980s. Near the bottom lay an emerald green dress preserved inside a protective garment bag. I smiled the instant I saw it. "I remember this," I said softly. Ethan looked up from another box. "Special occasion?" "My cousin Lydia's wedding." I gently unfolded the dress, running my fingers across the fabric. "I haven't seen this in decades." "It still looks beautiful," he said. "I'm sure it belongs in a museum by now." "You should try it on." I laughed. "I doubt it fits." "You've been saying that about everything." He wasn't teasing me. He simply sounded curious. After a moment, I carried the dress downstairs and changed in front of my bedroom mirror. To my surprise, the zipper closed. Not perfectly, but comfortably enough. I stood there studying my reflection. The woman looking back wasn't 25 anymore. Time had left its mark. Silver strands framed my face. Fine lines told stories of laughter and loss alike. Yet something unexpected happened. Instead of searching for everything that had changed, I noticed everything that remained. Strength, warmth, grace. When I returned upstairs, Ethan smiled warmly. "It suits you." "You really think so?" "I do." His words weren't about pretending I hadn't grown older. They were about seeing confidence returning to someone who had spent too many years believing she had faded into the background. That simple encouragement stayed with me for the rest of the day. We continued sorting through boxes, talking about everything from family traditions to embarrassing childhood stories. The attic no longer felt heavy. It felt hopeful. That evening, after Ethan left, I found myself opening the photo album again. For the first time, I didn't compare myself to the young woman smiling from those pages. Instead, I recognized her. She wasn't someone I had lost. She was someone I had carried with me all along. The following afternoon, while washing dishes, I caught myself smiling for no particular reason. Ethan stopped by again. "You look happier," he observed. "I think I am." What changed? I considered the question carefully. I spent years believing life had already given me its best moments. And now, I think there's still more waiting. He smiled. "I've been hoping you'd realize that." His confidence in me was contagious. He never tried to tell me who I should become. He simply reminded me that I was still capable of becoming someone new. One rainy afternoon, we discovered a small wooden box tucked beneath an old blanket. Inside were dozens of letters. Most came from friends and relatives. One envelope immediately caught my attention. Across the front, in unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Grace, when you need this most." My breath caught. William. With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter. Ethan quietly sat nearby, giving me the space I needed. William wrote about gratitude. He thanked me for the years we had shared. He wrote about our children, our adventures, our ordinary mornings that had become extraordinary simply because we experienced them together. Then came the words that brought tears to my eyes. He hoped I would keep living. He hoped I would continue laughing. He hoped I would never mistake loyalty to his memory for permission to stop embracing life. When I finished reading, I folded the letter carefully. "I miss him," I whispered. "I know," Ethan replied gently, "but I think he'd be proud of you." So do I. For the first time since William's passing, those words didn't feel impossible to believe. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet victories. I joined a local book club. I started gardening again. I signed up for a watercolor class I'd been postponing for years. I even met neighbors I had barely spoken to despite living beside them for decades. The attic had done more than help me organize old belongings. It had helped me organize my heart. Looking back, I realized Ethan hadn't rescued me. He had simply reminded me that I was never as lost as I believed. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive through grand gestures. Sometimes it begins with a dusty attic, an old record player, a forgotten dress, and someone who believes you're still capable of writing new chapters. For the first time in years, I no longer felt like my story had ended. It finally felt as though a new one was beginning. For a little while, it felt as though the rest of the world had faded into the background. The attic had become our place, not because it held secrets, but because it held stories. Every dusty box, every faded photograph, every forgotten keepsake reminded me that my life had been rich long before grief convinced me otherwise. Ethan continued stopping by every few days. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he arrived carrying pastries from the bakery downtown. Other days he simply appeared with a cheerful, "Ready to tackle another corner?" We settled into an easy routine. There was comfort in working alongside someone who never hurried me. Some afternoons we sorted photographs for hours, carefully labeling names and dates on the backs before placing them into new albums. Other days we listened to old records while cleaning shelves that hadn't seen daylight in decades. We laughed often. The kind of laughter that sneaks up on you after years of believing you've forgotten how. One Tuesday afternoon, we uncovered a small wooden box filled with recipe cards written by my mother. Many still carried tiny stains of flour or vanilla. Together, we decided to cook one of the recipes that evening. The kitchen, once painfully quiet, filled with conversation, the sound of chopping vegetables, and the comforting aroma of homemade bread. "You know," Ethan said while stirring soup, "Grandpa would probably tell us we're adding too much garlic." I laughed. He absolutely would. And he'd still eat 2 bowls. He certainly would. For the first time in years, talking about William no longer brought only sadness. It brought smiles as well. That felt like progress. As the weeks passed, I noticed other changes. I began opening the curtains every morning instead of leaving them closed. Fresh flowers appeared on my kitchen table. Music returned to the house. I started reading novels again instead of watching endless television. One afternoon, I even signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. When I told Ethan, he smiled proudly. "I knew you'd do something like this." "What made you so sure?" "Because you're curious again." His answer stayed with me. Perhaps curiosity was the first sign that healing had finally begun. Not everyone understood the changes they saw. Small towns have long memories, and people often build stories from incomplete pieces. One afternoon, while returning from the market carrying fresh apples and warm bread, I overheard 2 women talking outside a neighborhood cafe. "Grace certainly seems different lately. I've heard she's always out doing something now." I wonder what's changed. Their words weren't cruel, just curious. Still, I realized how easily people filled silence with assumptions. When I arrived home, Ethan was sitting on the front porch reading. "You look thoughtful," he observed. "I suppose I am." I sat beside him and sighed. It feels strange becoming someone new when everyone remembers the old version of you. He closed his book. "Maybe you're not becoming someone new." I looked at him. "Maybe you're simply allowing people to meet the person you've always been." That perspective stayed with me for days. Not long afterward, my daughter Claire arrived unexpectedly. She noticed the changes immediately. The brighter rooms, fresh flowers, paintbrushes drying by the sink, travel brochures spread across the dining room table. "You've been busy," she said. "I have." She looked around carefully. "I wasn't expecting this." I wasn't either. Over tea we talked honestly for the first time in years. I admitted how lonely I had become after William died, how easy it had been to mistake surviving for living, how grateful I was that family had encouraged me to reconnect with the world. Eventually, I retrieved William's letter from my desk drawer. Without speaking, I handed it to her. She read every word quietly. When she finished, tears glistened in her eyes. "He wanted you to keep living." "He did." "I'm sorry I forgot that." "So did I." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I think Dad would be happy seeing you smile again." Those words lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The following months unfolded gently. I planted a larger garden. I joined a local walking group. I volunteered twice a week at the public library, helping organize children's reading programs. I even traveled to the coast for the first time in years. Not because I was trying to escape the past, because I was finally willing to embrace the future. Ethan remained a steady presence throughout it all. Sometimes we worked together in the garden. Sometimes we shared family dinners. Sometimes we simply talked on the porch until sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and lavender. He never tried to rescue me. He simply reminded me, again and again, that I still had time. One night, I dreamed of William. We were standing in the little yellow kitchen of our first home together. Everything looked exactly as I remembered it. Sunlight poured through the windows. Coffee brewed on the stove. He smiled the moment he saw me. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been trying." "You don't have to try so hard." "I miss you." "I know." I was afraid moving forward meant leaving you behind. William shook his head gently. "Love doesn't disappear because life continues." I looked at him with tears in my eyes. "What if I'm changing?" "I hope you are." "I don't understand." He smiled the same warm smile that had comforted me for decades. Growing older was always the plan. I woke before dawn with tears on my face. For the first time since losing him, those tears carried more gratitude than sorrow. Life didn't become perfect after that. There were still difficult mornings. There were anniversaries that reopened old wounds. There were quiet evenings when the house felt larger than it should. But there were also dinners with family. Afternoons, painting landscapes. Weekend visits from Claire and Megan. Books waiting beside my favorite chair. Fresh herbs growing outside the kitchen window. And laughter echoing through rooms that had once felt painfully silent. One evening, while watching the sunset from the porch, I realized something extraordinary. For years I believed grief had become my identity. Now I understood it had only been one chapter. The story wasn't over. Not even close. There were still places to visit, people to love, friendships to strengthen, dreams to chase. The attic had started as a room full of forgotten possessions. It became the place where I remembered the most important thing of all. No matter how much life changes us, it is never too late to begin living again. There were no dramatic turning points after that. No grand speeches. No miraculous transformation that happened overnight. Instead, life changed the way seasons do, quietly, almost unnoticed, until one day you realize the landscape around you has become something entirely different. The attic was finally empty. Every photograph had found a new album. Every keepsake had been carefully sorted. Every forgotten memory had been given a place once again. Yet what remained wasn't a room full of boxes. It was a woman who no longer felt buried beneath them. One crisp autumn morning, I found a folded note resting beneath my teacup on the kitchen table. I smiled before I even opened it. Ethan had always enjoyed leaving small surprises. Inside, written in his familiar handwriting, were just a few simple words. Thank you for reminding me where I come from. Watching you rediscover yourself has reminded me to keep growing too. I sat quietly for several minutes, reading the note more than once. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't dramatic. It was something better. It was gratitude. And somehow, gratitude has a way of healing places that words alone cannot reach. I slipped the note into the same wooden box that now held William's final letter. The two messages sat side by side. One had reminded me to keep living after unimaginable loss. The other reminded me that my journey forward had inspired someone else. Together, they felt like two chapters of the same story. Life doesn't begin again because we forget the people we've loved. It begins again because we finally understand they would never have wanted us to stop living. Weeks later, Claire pulled into the driveway with Megan beside her. This visit felt different. There was no tension waiting at the front door. Only warmth. Megan jumped from the car before it had barely stopped. Grandma. She wrapped her arms around me so tightly, I nearly lost my balance. I laughed. I've missed you too. Claire followed more slowly. She looked around the yard, noticing the flower beds, the newly painted porch, and the vegetable garden bursting with late-season tomatoes. You've done a lot. I suppose I have. She smiled. So have you. We spent the afternoon making apple pie using my mother's recipe. Flour dusted every countertop. Megan insisted on rolling the dough herself. The crust came out uneven. None of us cared. The kitchen echoed with laughter that hadn't lived there for years. Later that evening, while washing dishes together, Claire grew quiet. I owe you an apology. You don't. I do. She dried her hands on a towel before continuing. I spent so much time worrying about what everyone else might think that I forgot to ask what you actually needed. I rested a hand on hers. You were trying to protect me. I know. But maybe I was protecting you from the wrong things. I smiled gently. The hardest person for me to forgive was myself. She nodded. I think I understand that now. Outside, Ethan was repairing a loose step on the porch, while Megan enthusiastically handed him the wrong tools every few minutes. Their laughter drifted through the open window. Family, I realized, isn't built only through perfect moments. It's built through patience, through listening, through showing up again and again. As autumn settled across the countryside, I found myself saying yes to opportunities one would once have avoided. I joined friends on weekend outings. I visited museums I'd always meant to see. I attended concerts, planted bulbs for spring flowers, and filled journals with thoughts I never imagined writing. One Saturday morning, Ethan suggested we drive to the coast with several family members. The weather was cool enough for sweaters, but warm enough to enjoy walking along the beach. The ocean stretched endlessly before us. Waves rolled toward shore with patient certainty. Megan chased seashells, while Claire laughed from a distance. I stood quietly, letting the breeze lift strands of silver hair from my face. For a long time, I simply listened. The sea has a remarkable way of putting everything into perspective. Standing there, I realized I had spent years believing grief had become the final chapter of my life. I had been wrong. Grief had never been the ending. It had only been one season. Another had been waiting all along. On our walk back, Ethan joined me. You look peaceful. I think I finally am. What changed? I smiled toward the horizon. I stopped asking whether life could ever be what it once was. And I started asking what it could become instead. He nodded thoughtfully. I like that answer. So do I. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I opened the old photo album once more. There she was again. The young woman laughing on a sunny beach in a bright yellow swimsuit. For years I believed I wanted to become her again. Looking at the photograph now, I understood something different. I didn't need to become that young woman. She had never truly disappeared. She had simply grown older. She had loved deeply, lost deeply, learned deeply. And somehow, despite everything, she still knew how to hope. I closed the album with a grateful heart. The attic had given me memories. My family had given me courage. Life had given me another beginning. And as I turned off the lights and walked downstairs, I realized something that would have seemed impossible only a year before. The most meaningful chapters of my story were no longer behind me. They were still waiting to be written.